packages to the officers, and that looked very attractive to me. And I went into the consulting business, and I've been consulting ever since. Most of my consulting work is in the Western Interconnect, which includes the Puget Sound area. The work I've been doing is all pro bono. My wife wonders why that is, but I'm doing it.
You mean here, not just everybody?
Pardon me?
You mean here on this project, or do you mean with every Western Interconnect project you work on?
No, on this project.
Okay.
And I've put a lot of time on this project. You will see a lot of documents of mine in the effort. And I'm going to be putting here sort of the concepts and standards that that we have to deal with. How do I make this thing go?
It's the right hand.
Right one. Oh, thank you. So as already been said a little bit, the Western Electricity Coordinating Council oversees this entire grid. It's a very large geographic area, many states. Puget is embedded in this grid. WEC. What is WEC? They're the regional entity that monitors and enforces reliability standards in the Western Interconnection, these big grids, subject to oversight by NERC and FERC. So they're the ones that make sure that the planning gets done right. WEC. So what does WEC do? One of its tasks is to collect from every utility in this huge area, including Puget, information about its transmission lines, its transformers, its loads, load forecasts, generation data, and put that information into a massive database. One database that has all that information in it. Their mission is to use that information to plan for, monitor, and maintain electric reliability for the entire Western grid, including the Puget Sound interconnected portion of that. There are base cases that WCC is required to develop every year by FERC. They make these base cases, and then they make these base cases, provide them to FERC so that people like myself can get this data if a utility refuses to provide it themselves. And I can get this data and I can do my own studies to check on the studies that Puget has done. Each year, WCC develops a series of base cases for different seasons, for example, summer and winter, for several years into the future, in order to assure that there are appropriate plans to meet future electricity demands in a reliable fashion. This is WCC doing these base cases. Of course, Puget's participating in this. In Western Washington, as we talked about, it's a heavy winter peaking situation. So WCC provides base cases for the winter, heavy winter. Here is one created by WCC in the year 2013 that projected into the year 2018. This represents a reliable system as determined by FERC, what was based on information given to it by Puget. So I want to focus, you can see, well, let's see, Puget Sound region in this huge area, it's kind of a load pocket. What does that load pocket mean? It has a lot more load than it has generation in that area. It's a load pocket. But there are generators in there, and guess what? WCC said on a heavy winter day, to be reliable, you need to run your local generation, all 1,600 megawatts of it. You might agree with Canada that some of this power you let get shipped to Canada, you have to reach an agreement with Canada on how much will be flowing there. Then some of it will go south towards Portland, that's a little bit out of that region, but somebody has to serve that load. But how are we going to serve all this load because we don't have enough generation that you bring in 8,100 megawatts over the Cascade Mountains. It could come from the Club River Hydro, their coal plants in Montana, wind plants over there. Maybe some of this is coming from Oregon, we don't know. But this is a base case. 2013 base case, looked at the year 2018.
Just
I
a
found-
question,
What's that?
the 1,600 megawatt of local generation, is that saying that the Puget Sound region generates 1,600 megawatts or it uses that much?
That's generating it.
Somewhere
generating.
around here, we generate 1,600 megawatts.
You can actually calculate, back calculate how much it's using because we know how much we're bringing in, 8,100, 1,600 is generated there as well, so that's 9,700. You know, do some adjustments and changes, and you can figure out what the load is there. Just algebra. So one of the reason I'm picking on this one is because this is when Quanta and Puget did their studies, 2013. So I said, okay, well this is the stuff that they had when they ran their studies. So I really wanted to see their studies and their database because something sounded fishy to me, but they wouldn't give it to me. So I got this base case because that's what they're supposed to start with. And I want to focus on for this purpose, I want to focus on the 1,600 megawatts of in-area generation that exists, that WCC said had to be running in order to have a reliable system. And oh, by the way, you could still deliver 500 megawatts to Canada here, but they didn't. The Northwest and Canada didn't agree that, oh, that maybe we should make it 800, or maybe we should make it 0, or maybe we should make it 1,100. They agreed as a group. And WCC requires these two regions to agree on this number, 500. Now these base cases are done assuming everything's working. They say, well, let's just assume everything works. Right? Well, we know things can break, but first, let's see if we can have a reliable system if everything's working. We call it N-0. 0 means no forced outages. Okay, so we're given the stuff with no forced outages. And then we're supposed to do something with it as a utility. And that's all described, as we talked about before, in this NERC reliability standard, TPL, which stands for Transmission Planning, 001, which is the first and only really one, -4 means it's the fourth revision. This is a 22-page document. It's been developed with several rulemakings by FERC, where all the stakeholders, utilities weigh in. What are we going to say about how we're supposed to do transmission planning? And this is the document that everybody is supposed to use. Now, if you get into this document, it talks about extreme event contingencies. Extreme event contingencies. You have to study some contingencies. A contingency means, well, you started with everything working, but what if something fails? And there are, as we talked about, well, you could have one thing fail, that would be N-1. You could have one thing fail, and then 30 minutes later, a second thing fail, we'll call that N-1-1. Or you could have N-2, which is those two things fail at the same time. Slight difference there, because if you have a little bit of time, you might be able to adjust before the next one happens. Puget says they don't like to do that. So they just study N-2. Now Puget has said, for purposes of the east side, that the two things that they're worried about is one transformer, 230 to 115 at Sammamish, and one transformer, 230 to 115 at Talbot Hill. I didn't check to see if those are the worst contingencies. They told me those are their worst contingencies on the the east side of Lake Washington. So, well, assuming one of the things that, well, these contingencies could be a loss of the generators. They could have studied loss of generators. Like here's, what if this generator failed at 1 and then 20 minutes later, this one failed? Okay, that's N-2. So the the contingencies could be a transmission line, could be a transformer, those are the ones that Puget picked, could be a generator. But the fact is, you only have up to 2 of these things. Changes in the 30 minutes, so we'll just assume they all happen at the same time, n-2. So you're allowed to do that under this reliability criteria. Now, the left side of this chart is the same as you saw before. What we have, since we have such a complicated system, we can't get on a spreadsheet and figure out if we got a problem or not. We can't figure out how these lines are going to load up. We have 16,000 lines in the WCC database. A handful of them here are on the east side. So computer simulations called load flow studies, sometimes they call them power studies, power flow studies, sometimes they just call them studies. They test the utilities portion of the grid for reliability. Will there be outages if an n-2 event occurs in what historically is a peak usage day? We run this thing, we take these 2 outages out, and we take these 2 facilities out of forced outage, and then we run this model. Are there problems? And of course, these guys, and Roger Shipman and I, had our computers up, and the databases up, and we ran these models. If no outage occurs on n-2, that meets the criteria, TPLO 1.2. You've met the criteria. This is the goal that all power planners work for. Can I meet it under the n-2, under the extreme event, cold winter day in the west?
Just to be really clear, a successful scenario or test is you draw your scenario and the 2 awful things happen, but nobody experiences a power outage.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so over-designed, overbuilt infrastructure actually violates FERC policy. When they set this up, they said, well, why wouldn't we do n-3 or n-4? And people said, well, gee, we would be building a lot of infrastructure here that has such a remote possibility of ever being called upon that it wouldn't make sense economically, it wouldn't make sense environmentally. And the WTC itself requires least cost energy solutions. So if FERC says, and it says n-2 is how you're supposed to do it, don't go to n-3, you are violating the FERC requirements. Puget, when they ran the studies in 2013 and 2015, actually they had Quanta run the studies, which has always bothered me because they have excellent in-house people, but they went to a utility in North Carolina to study this for them. And they ran n-8. n-8. The universally used FERC n-2 reliability criteria balances for risk versus cost. Designing for an n-8 disaster is not reasonable, not environmentally sound, and not cost effective.
Silly question, is that like a Kobe level earthquake in Kobe, Japan?
I don't know what that means, but I will say that it would be an 80-mile-an-hour wind in Puget Sound area.
Okay.
Reliable power does not mean guaranteed power under all circumstances. Everybody understands that. We've been talking about, we've had some outages here, and we've had a lot of outages here. It wasn't because of the failure of these 2 transformers. N-2 reliability sets a reasonable cost-benefit limit that has been long accepted by the power industry and regulatory authorities. Designing beyond that limit is not reasonable. A very extreme n-8 event can occur at 80-mile-an-hour wind here. We have them here. Outages in such an event are expected. We all say we don't like to have outages. We don't know how long it's going to take to get them back. But when you have an 80-mile-an-hour wind, that's life. Some of these people have said, I just can't take outages. I mean, I heard all these people say, I can't take outages. That's why we tell people, if you have to have 100% reliability, you better build a standby generator. That's why the hospitals have standby generators. We have a lot of standby generators in this part of the country. And if you go to some of these places sell them, a lot of people have them at their own homes, because maybe it's not an emergency, but a convenience. You put them in, and you have them, if you need that kind of response. Now, if somebody says, yeah, but I'm worried about my machine not running, and you're in Bellevue, and okay, why don't we tell Puget to build a small peaker at Lakeside? If you want to solve it by injecting power at Lakeside, rather than building a big line there and a transformer, why don't you put a small peaker there? This event is almost never going to occur, so the thing will never run. But if it does, they just turn it on. Okay, you solved your problem. You don't have to build all these lines. To the best of my knowledge, no utility anywhere has ever built a project set to meet N-8 contingencies. I know of no project from 40 years experience in the power business that went beyond the N-2 criteria. N-8 shouldn't be on the table. So, what did Puget do? They started with the base case and they said, well, let's just take these units out. Let's take them out and see if we got a problem. Oh, we got a problem. Well, first of all, they're saying, well, we didn't really assume the generators would fail. We just assumed they wouldn't run them. Well, why wouldn't you run them in the middle of the winter? When I was at Puget, we acquired these exact resources so we could run them and have them available when the peak came along. And we never scheduled maintenance for them when we were starting into the winter season. We scheduled the maintenance in the spring and the fall. So, you know, to suggest that, well, but we want to do a study here to see how things look under all of them off is ridiculous.
Are these diesel generators? What are they?
What's that?
Are these diesel generators? What are they?
So most of these are natural gas-fired generators. So, you know, that's the technology preferred lately. It's a jet engine with, on the end of it, a generator. And you fuel it either with oil, natural gas, jet fuel, whatever you decide, and you can actually put oil on storage on site, which we did several of them, to make sure that fuel is available when you need it. Common sense would tell you. Common sense would tell you. You shouldn't have to go to the TPL, oh, what that's for, but you could get it there also. But common sense will tell you, you don't shut these off when you're going into a winter peak. You would turn them back on. Now, when Puget shuts off these generators, well, they were generators that, you know, you really need to have those in order to meet your own load. So if you decide to shut them off, well, you've got to bring power from somewhere else. So to shut them off, they had to bring power. We don't know exactly what they did because they didn't show us. They won't show us their cases, right? We asked for them, they won't show it. But they had to bring power in from Southern California or Arizona or Wyoming. They had to bring it in so that they could shut down their generators because they still needed the power. Well, the problem with that is, well, what are these guys going to charge you for the power, number one? Number two, it has to move long distances over transmission lines. Hopefully, if they start this plan, well, what if those transmission lines can't handle moving all that power? Because they don't really plan that. The WCC base case didn't plan that. And then, well, somebody's going to charge you for using their lines because you don't own these lines. So if you want to schedule your power over their lines, they're going to charge you. And then guess what? There's losses occur. Now you have to generate more power because you have to also cover the losses. That's a ridiculous plan. What you would do, hey, skip that. Let's just turn on the generators that were here that were built for this purpose. Now there's another oops, pardon me. Got distracted. There's another issue that bothered me about the Puget quanta studies that were done in 2013, 2015. Like I said, WCC, when they form these base cases, they require the utilities to agree on transfers across their path. They have to do this. So Canada and the Northwest agreed 500 megawatts is what they would put across this path in the base case. So what did Quanta decide to do? Oh, they decided to change it to 1,500. They don't have the right to force Canada to take another 1,000 megawatts. Canada doesn't want it. Nobody's asked Canada, well, what would you prefer if we send you 1,500 megawatts? That's a ridiculous change. You can't be making that change and be consistent with how this whole reliability planning function works. Because if everybody just started changing what WCC said in their base case, well, nobody would know whose generation was going where and why and what. This makes no sense just to change this in the base case to this number. Simulating an absurd endless contingency scenario to justify Energize Eastside violates NERC, TPL 014, the rationale for and practice of WCC, and simple common sense. But that's what Puget has done to justify this line. As for the rest of the story, so on March 18th, I submitted with my declaration to you my comments for this proceeding. And I would encourage you, for the rest of the story, to read those comments. I didn't repeat them here, but they provide more substance to this. But this is the picture I wanted to give to you today so that you would understand what extent Puget had to go to try to justify that Energize Eastside is needed. Now with that, I want to just spend a few minutes rebutting a few things that I heard earlier.
You got about 5 minutes.
You heard Puget say, FERC said we did it right. Well, I have rebutted that in several places in my December 11, 2017 comments, which are in the record at 11749 to 11757. I provided the truth about that FERC order, just like Larry talked about. They didn't say FERC did everything, Puget did everything right. They said they don't have authority to make them redo the studies because it's all within the region. Second, they talk about the use report, said, well, even without the Canada, we still have a problem. Well, they missed my 2019 declaration that says, provided on March 18th, just a few weeks ago, where on page 9, item 4 of that, I point out that, well, actually, you said if the stuff goes to Canada, there's just one small overload remaining set of transformer. But you didn't run all these Puget generators. We asked, well, did you run them all? No, we didn't run them all. Well, the point is, if you run them all, that thing doesn't overload either. You have no problem if you run all the generators and you don't show all that power to Canada. And then it was said that Columbia Grid sets these flows to Canada. What the heck? WCC says that people have to agree between that. Canada doesn't want that. As Robert McCullough says, they passed a law. They don't want American power to meet their needs. They can't justify Peace River Site C if they take power from the United States. They passed a law. We don't want you to count that power from the United States coming to Canada. So Quanta could decide to give them 1,500. I like it or not. And finally, David Townsend talked about the comprehensive plan in 1993. I left Puget in 1996. I was there for this comprehensive plan. There are no load flows in 1993 that said, well, we're going to need to build this Energize Eastside down this corridor. There were no load flows. They just said, well, let's try to reserve some areas. They did not look at alternatives that might be needed. They didn't even, at that point, hadn't even defined the problem but they wanted to reserve some space on the land. They didn't look at alternatives that might be available. I have an alternatives report in this record at 5193 to 5203. It talks in great detail about alternatives to building this land if you have a problem. Well, they didn't even look at those alternatives in 1993 when they said maybe we're going to need this land. And they didn't look at the Seattle City Light alternative because in 1993, FERC had not yet required open access transmission. And Puget could not force Seattle to let them use their line back in that day. But we now have FERC ordered open access transmission. And in my alternatives report, I describe how Puget can get Seattle to let them use their line if they want to or not. The bottom line is, if there's really a problem in Bellevue, or somebody just perceives there's a problem, they want to fix it, you could put a small generator at Lakeside and just run it when this problem arises. Or you could loop the Seattle City Light, this line that already runs over Woodridge Hill. You could just loop it into Lakeside and back out and put your transformer there. Those are real alternatives. They're more cost effective and they're more environmentally appropriate, and they don't hit all these residences with some terrible impacts because you don't do that with them when you build these alternatives.